Hello and happy Easter. Last time you saw this car in one of the videos, I had just finished rebuilding the front end on it. It's not even completely done yet, but I got it to the point where I could actually drive it around to see how drivable the car is, because I know nothing about it. I bought it sight unseen from Copart and had it delivered here. After replacing the fender, bumper, headlights, grille, radiator support, power steering, cooler, I took it for a drive. We filled it up with gas and I got a low oil pressure warning. Usually that is very bad news. And I mean, in this case, it's also very bad news because obviously the car is not ready for sale. Not only is it not ready for sale, I also need to get a rebuilt inspection done on this before I can sell it. To those who don't know, I am a licensed car dealer. My dealership's name is Zeros of A, where I focus primarily on European and German cars, and more specifically VAG cars. Volkswagens, Audis, Porsches. Haven't gotten into a Porsche yet, but I really want to. And I've spent a decent amount of money on Copart buying cars that I probably shouldn't have bought. No, just kidding. I think almost everything I've bought so far has been a pretty good idea and ended up pretty well for me. But with this car, low oil pressure issues. So if you don't know much about these, this is a VR6 3.6 liter engine, which are generally known for being pretty reliable. They're also very buildable. This is a very common swap into B5A4s, some Volkswagens, B5 S4s. Honestly, a lot of different cars have been swapped with these engines and turboed. These things can handle quite a bit of boost with proper modifications, and have been built up to 1,000 horsepower plus. However, unfortunately, I've noticed this trend with Touaregs and Q7s, which are, very daleable, like family cars, soccer mom cars, that they just don't get the love they deserve and that they need. They do not get maintained as well as they should be, and frequently these do end up having issues. So a big problem on these is timing chains. I mean, I wouldn't say it's as big as the 2.0 inline fours in 2006 plus Audi A4s and some other Volkswagens and stuff like that. But it is definitely an issue on these, and it's also located in the back of the engine, making it very, you basically have to pull the motor to service that. However, this motor is at 146,000 miles, and I don't think it should need that unless it was very poorly maintained in the past. Anyway, back to the oil pressure issue, possible causes for that. For one, it could be as simple as needing an oil change, maybe a clogged oil filter. Speaking of which, the oil filter on these cars is absolutely terrible to work on. I think it's my most hated oil filter design in everything I've worked on. We could also have a bad oil pump. That is the worst case scenario. It is not a common failure point, but it is possible. What I'm thinking is the most likely scenario is the fact that it has a bad PCV valve. The PCV valve in these cars, as far as I remember, is built into the valve cover. It is somewhere under that area here, meaning that we do have to take off the intake manifold, which is not the easiest job ever because of some of the fuel lines in the back. This is a high pressure fuel pump right here, which is not the easiest to pull out and definitely pretty frustrating to work on. Nevertheless, I don't think I have much of a choice. We are gonna have to remove the intake, remove the valve cover, and inspect the PCV. I'm not going to buy the part just yet because I think, as far as I know, there's a couple of different options for this. You can, OEM, if you brought it to a dealer, you would be buying the whole valve cover with the PCV built in. However, if I'm not mistaken, which I could be, I think you can disassemble the valve cover ever so slightly and pull out the PCV diaphragm, because that's usually the one thing that breaks, either that or the spring. Basically just rebuild the existing unit. That is going to be a very cost-effective option. I have not changed the oil or the filter yet, and I probably should, but I just find it so unlikely that it's an oil filter issue. Even though the oil is pretty dark in this, it's not terrible, and it's definitely there. It's at a good level. So I don't think this car was that poorly maintained. So we're gonna try and get to that diaphragm, see what kind of state it's in, and go from there. Okay, so I ended up deciding to put the car on ramps just to get a better look at the bottom in case I do need to go to the bottom. I figured while I'm down there, let's take a look at the oil pressure sensor. Maybe we'll get lucky and it's just some sort of a wiring issue. So I already unplugged it from the actual sensor. We have a connector somewhere out here. There we go. And looks like there's some electrical tape on this. So I wonder if this was previously repaired. Potentially that's all we're dealing with here. Okay, I'm not seeing anything wrong with the wiring. I don't think we have an issue with that. I think they might have put the tape on just because this little plastic tube was falling apart. Now, just to be safe, I am gonna swap the sensor. So I really doubt that this would fix our issue, but we might as well throw this in. Okay, with the new sensor installed, the question is, do I wanna go driving around and test this? It's just that replacing this is so unlikely to fix our issue. However, if it did, it would be great, and it would be, yeah, I kind of have to test this, don't I? I've driven it about 5 minutes so far after letting it idle, maybe like another 10-15 minutes. So our coolant is already at operating temperature. The oil is not just yet, but so far I have not gotten the oil pressure light, which I had gotten previously after driving and idling for about the same amount of time. So there's a slight chance that we're good and a pressure sensor is all we needed. I mean, that would be absolutely fantastic. Something else I'm noticing is that the steering wheel is slightly out of alignment, and the exhaust, I don't know if it's a leak or if this was modified, because it doesn't seem to be a leak, but it's definitely louder than it should be. So potentially somebody did something to make this thing a little louder. Let's floor it. Floored it, and she's doing pretty good. And still, no oil pressure light. I'm so glad I didn't start taking the intake manifold off. I'm starting to get convinced that we don't have any oil pressure issues, which I'm very happy about. Quick reminder, I got this thing for like a total of $1,000. For $1,000, this car is doing very, very well. I'm gonna have to fix this. This is definitely bothering me quite a bit. I'm also gonna have to fix that headliner in the back. That is awful. I'm not really one to be very meticulous with my cars, so especially with headliners, especially in cars that are worth $3,000 to $4,000. So potentially, I think what I'm gonna do is simply staple that. And usually when you try to glue this stuff, it just doesn't really work, and it shows through the headliner. And it seems that this stuff just shrinks with age, because it's really hard to, like, you can feel there's a lot of tension on it if you try and pull it in all the way where it's supposed to be. And maybe that's why they have such issues with falling off. But this is pretty much what the final product is. Don't judge me too hard. I realize this is not a high quality repair, but this is not a valuable car. I'm not going to be ripping out the whole headliner and reupholstering that. Just as long as it doesn't hang down and get in the way of your rear view mirror, I think this will suffice. And I believe it's gonna hold. It's gonna hold better than the OEM glue does. I'd also fixed the taillight. Both the turn signal bulb and brake light were not working. The reason for that is just corrosion. All I had to do was add some dielectric grease. I did change the bulbs just for the sake of changing them. Next, we're gonna get rid of that. Little snacks. So because the car seems to be run and drive, I'm going to check all the seat belts, because we're gonna try and get it inspected in 2 days. I think she should be ready to go. I am gonna wipe down this drain pan just to make sure there's nothing in here, and to see what kind of state the oil in this car is in. Since we did throw the oil pressure light, there's still a possibility that there's some sort of motor damage, and we'll be able to find out with this oil. Looks like this is all just little bubbles, but it's definitely pretty old oil. Now the oil filter uses a 36 millimeter. And yes, there is an Allen bolt in there that you could use to drain it, drain the oil filter housing. However, because of the location of this, if you look straight down under it, right under it is a subframe, there's some hoses. Basically, regardless, I think you're gonna make a mess. There we go, that's the mess. Yeah. Trust me, I've done it both ways in these cars, and you're making a mess no matter what. It is literally inevitable no matter what you do. To be completely honest, I'm still quite skeptical about the fact that we have sold our low oil pressure light. It just never is this easy. However, I'm not going to complain if it is this time. I've gotten low oil pressure lights on a few occasions in my life, and every time it turned out to be a major pain in the butt. There's zero shavings inside of this oil filter housing. Looking at the oil filter, really nothing concerning in here. I don't see any shavings. I don't see any chunks of metal. Everything looks very solid. So I think it is very likely that all we had was a bad oil pressure sensor. Now I've got to try and find out what it is that I messed up with the windshield washer fluid reservoir, because I did have that out when I replaced the fender. Unfortunately, you have to take that out to replace the fender. Since then, it will not hold any fluid, so something's definitely not right. Now the bottleneck simply slides in from the fill hole into this little grommet here. I think our only issue is this little seal over here. So I'm gonna shove this guy in, cut off the excess, and we can stick the pump inside of that hose. We have nothing dripping out. So if you haven't seen my previous videos on this car, basically the previous owner has done something goofy with this. I think when he had totaled the car, or she, they decided to keep the head unit for themselves before sending the car off to the insurance. And they did it in the worst way possible, because this is easily unpluggable. Yeah, so all they had to do was unplug this. Instead, they decided to cut it, and now I have to butt connect this together. Looks like all this is color coded, so hopefully it's not going to be too bad. Hopefully we don't catch things on fire. Nice. We have nothing. Okay, so this guy is really not turning on. I found my old unit from the VA Touareg and plugged it in, and looks like this is not working either. So issue must be somewhere else. I already checked the fuses, but potentially maybe that got blown again. I mean, this thing is now blinking, which I suppose is a good thing. But never mind, I just didn't push the power button. But because this is out of a different car, we are getting into the safe mode, and we need the pin. There is this little wire over here, the red. I mean, I just thought it was odd. Looks like it's for accessory mode or something. I don't know. I tried connecting to the yellow, but looks like that got it to work. But it's also not turning off with the key being out of the ignition. We weren't getting any music out. I think we might be missing the stock amplifier. Head unit would not turn off with the ignition. It would not turn off if I closed both doors and locked the car. The screen, the head unit stayed on. And I think the reason for that is the wiring. So based on the wiring diagram for the head unit, we have two power wires. One is for consistent battery power, constant 12 volts, even when the car is off. And the second one is for accessory mode. And I believe the accessory mode is basically the one that would basically turn off the head unit when the ignition is off. And even though I matched all the colors, obviously the accessory mode function was not working. And I think that is due to the stock design and this thing not having the appropriate pinouts for this. These two are red and yellow. Both of them seem to be getting 12 volts at all times, which is why we keep getting 12 volts at all times to both the accessory mode and the power wire. I remembered something. I remembered that there was this wire that I've pulled out that I guess the previous owner has added. I believe it was this guy. That went from the fuse box down to here. And what was weird about it is that it was connected to a fuse that is non-existent. Like in this case, 47 and 48, these two bottom ones. Air suspension, and this one I imagine is for adaptive cruise control, which I didn't know they had in 2007. Regardless, those two fuses, as I tested with the multimeter, they only get power once the ignition is on. Otherwise, the voltage that I was picking up on was under 1 volt, meaning that they're not getting anything. But if the ignition is turned on, then they're getting 12 volts, which I suppose is good news. All we have to do is just hook that up. The bad news, however, is the fact that I already pulled this out thinking that I'm not gonna need this, which is gonna be hard because I'm not taking apart the interior for this. Ain't nobody got time for that. Is this it? I think that's it. We got it. Nice. That wasn't as bad as I thought. Now I'm hoping that I can use one of these guys to plug into the fuse pin and call it a day. Oh yeah, I think that's gonna work perfectly. Okay, it's time to test it. Harness into the car, plug this guy into here. So hopefully this thing is not going to turn on. Well, it's definitely not going to turn on because the screen is not attached. And there we go. Okay, so it is not turning on. And if we turn on our ignition, woo, we got it. Not that it matters a whole lot because we currently, like I mentioned, have no speaker output. I imagine the previous owner had installed an amplifier, considering the amount of wiring that's in the trunk. I'm pretty sure there was a subwoofer and there was an amplifier in there, meaning that when he pulled it out, we lost all communication with our speakers. So I don't really remember where the amplifier is supposed to be on these cars. I imagine I would have found it by now if it was supposed to be in there somewhere. So I am guessing they removed the stock amplifier and replaced it with an aftermarket unit, which was then gotten rid of or taken out by the previous owner. Also, if you have noticed how bad the alignment on the hood is, don't worry, like I'm going to fix this. I'm just getting the car ready for the inspection because after the inspection is going to be at least another like 2-3 weeks before I get the title and can list the car for sale. So I'm still planning on fixing a few issues on this after this, but right now we're just making sure that we have everything needed to get a rebuilt title for this car and make it road legal. Starting with headlights. Both work. High beams. Oh, cool. High beams don't work unless the car needs to be running or the hood needs to be shut. Oh, I forgot. This probably has to do with the fact that these were HID headlights and not the regular halogen ones that this car originally came with. Ooh, that might be an issue. We might have to rewire something. But anyway, let's test left signal, right signal, windshield wiper, sprayer. Ugh. And the windshield wipers will now work with the hood open. But I imagine that probably has something to do with these front headlights. Yeah, so what I think we're looking at here is the high beam, while this is the low beam. And for some reason, our high beams are working as the DRL. And as far as the rear goes, both taillights work. Do the brake lights work? Okay, I'm gonna take your word for it. All right, so as it turns out, the wiring for the HID or xenon versus halogen lights is significantly different, which we already sort of kind of knew. And to the point where there's even a company that makes adapter harnesses, basically, to upgrade cars with halogens to HIDs. And those adapters are like over $100. My inspection for the rebuild title is coming up tomorrow first thing in the morning, and that means that I kind of don't have time. And this Touareg has already passed the inspection, so we're gonna pull out the headlights out of this and put them into this car because that's the fastest and most efficient way of passing the inspection. And while I'm waiting for the rebuild title for this car, after passing the inspection, I'm gonna figure out the wiring, get it all fixed up and ready to go. There we go. And this is exactly the reason why I like having multiples of the same car. As you can see, it actually turns out to be very beneficial, or at least useful occasionally. Nice. Okay, side marker working, high beam working, low beam working, same. And we checked both turn signals, those are working. I think we're good to go.